Thank you so much. I'm sorry I can't be there. I'm not there. I try to restrict my travel at my age, given what's going on in the world. And I want to shout out to Jerry Fry. Sorry I won't see you after all those years in person. But here goes. How are we going to do renewable energy and get rid of nuclear power and fossil fuels all at the same time? Let me share. There's a lot that's been said about decarbonization. And much of it is right, but much of the thinking is also off base. And I'll explain why I say that. There are lots of wonderful, technically very competent, excellent people working on it, but most of them don't think that 100% renewable energy system can be possible. Some very good people I deeply respect. Dr. Chu was Secretary of Energy, Nobel Prize winner. He said, well, we don't have nuclear energy when the sun doesn't shine and the wind doesn't blow. It's the choice between fossil fuels and nuclear. And I'll tell you why I don't agree with that today. And I have done the homework before saying that, of course. It would not be responsible of me to say that without doing the homework. All right, I won't talk a lot about nuclear because we have a wonderful panel. There's David Schlissel, there's Ed Lyman. They're going to talk about SMRs. I'm just going to briefly tell you why it's the wrong thing to do. Okay, we need a decarbonized electricity sector by 2040 or before. I think that's generally understood. We have a shortage of time and money. We don't have a shortage of low carbon or zero carbon energy sources. In the first round of nuclear, which ended in the 1990s, about 120, a little more than 120 reactors that were announced were canceled. Some had started construction, some, applied for licenses, various stages. And about as many were built. So it was a 50-50 record. Not great, but not bad. The largest nuclear power system in the world, whether you think it's good or bad, but 50-50 success in building them and turning them on. Now, they said, well, the licensing is very complicated. It's two-step construction license. Then there's operating license. It's very cumbersome. Every reactor is different. Let's modularize it. We'll make the AP1000. We'll make the simplified boiling water reactor. And we'll certify the reactors. They'll all be ready to go, and we'll give a single license for construction and operation. It'll all be very smooth. NRC builds a whole new building when the nuclear to handle all the license applications, and 34 reactors were announced. That was 15, 17 years ago. And you can find the list with the NRC and the Congressional Research Service. Who will probably be complete next year, Vogel, about 6-7 years late. Instead of 14 billion, it'll be more than 30 billion. So if they're turned on, actually, it'll be a 6% success rate, which is kind of going in the wrong direction, don't you think, from 50-50? And I'm not counting Watts Bar 2, which was turned on sort of off and on, which started construction in 1972 and then stopped in the 1980s or 90s, and they started up again, and they said it'll be $1 billion, and I think it cost them about $4 billion to finish it. And this is something that was supposed to be mostly complete, an old design. So I'm not counting Watts Bar 2 because it's not a new reactor. No, none of the new reactors have been brought online. Small modular reactors at the beginning of the 2000s will be ready to go, in 2010. Then NuScale says we'll have the first one online 2015-16. And then they didn't even apply for certification till 2016. And then now the first one is supposed to be in 2028, but they changed the design in the meantime. It was supposed to be 50 megawatts, then it was supposed to be 60 megawatts. The 50 megawatts is partially certified. Correct me, Ed, I think it's not 100% certified yet, but it might be any of these days. But the 77 megawatt NuScale is not certified. None of the reactors that are, say, Duke Energy said, we're going to build 10,000 megawatts of nuclear, here or 4 SMRs. None of them are even certified. Okay. Wind and solar in the last 15 years, same period, nuclear renaissance is announced, wind and solar are going forward, and I did a little math in the last few days and found that wind and solar have generated about as much energy in the last 15 years as 350 NuScale reactors would do, about 30 full-size 1,000 megawatt reactors. The NuScale 77 megawatt version, the one that's not certified. So, record of the nuclear renaissance in nuclear generation in 15 years is 0. Wind and solar are pretty speedy and are going to be speeded up, and offshore wind is going to join them. Nuclear is more like waiting for Godot. And if you know the play, Godot never arrives. Maybe 6%. 6% is not going to be good enough. All right, so where are we? What kind of energy system do we have? Okay, now, we know we go to war for oil, and now there's fossil gas insecurities have been added to it. We have an electricity system that's pretty reliable most of the time, and it's controlled through the on-off switch in our homes and factories and buildings. Lack of choices, but it is more and more fragile as climate extremes worsen. Unaffordable for many, shockingly unaffordable. I'll come to that. Equity, inflexible, inefficient, polluting, not resilient, multi-generational pollution. It's time to change it. Okay. So I want to go over a little more detail. So we're really inefficient. Only about 30% of the nuclear fuel energy in nuclear fuel, when the fission happens and E equal to MC squared, only about 30% actually winds up in the homes or factories and offices. It's about the same for coal-fired power plants. For some gas plants, it's about the same, and some gas plants, it's less. Gas turbines, it's less. Combined cycle power plants, 55%, in the best one, 60% of the fuel energy in the fuel will wind up as electricity. But the typical figure overall in a fossil fuel generating system is about a third of the energy winds up as electricity. Most of the rest, that is steam. That's steam coming out of the cooling towers, and it's the same kind of device for coal-fired power plants and nuclear power. Is to the other 2/3 of the heat mostly winds up there. So after all that expense and throwing away 2/3 and getting only 30%, how is it at the using end? So this incandescent bulb was 3% of the electricity is converted to visible light. Most of the rest is infrared radiation. In the winter, it heats up your house a little bit. Not a very efficient way to do it. Now we have LEDs, 6 times more efficient, 7 times more efficient, depending. And still only 20% of the electricity is converted to light. So on the fuel, if you have fossil fuels, only 6%, 7% of the fuel energy in the nuclear fuel, for example, is converted to light in the home. That's not to talk about, turning off the lights and learning. How about we go to war for oil, and then what do we do with the oil? Most of it goes into transportation. Only about 15%, actually 20% winds up at the wheels. And, the object is not to move the metal. The object is to move the people. And I sometimes point out, on the people, the average, occupancy, I don't know, is 1.5, 1.7, something like that. So now we are converting 100% of the oil into mechanical, 15% mechanical motion or so, taking into account stoplights and all that. And only about 1/15 of that is actually used to move people. So you can solve that problem in two ways. You know, we can all eat more processed food and increase the payload, or we can improve the efficiency of the vehicle. We can also make the vehicle lighter, walkable cities, all that. But this system going to war for oil and only 15% actually moving the vehicle, including stoplights and all that, is a pretty dismal efficiency. If you convert this to electric, about 80% of the electricity winds up, including the charging losses of the battery and so on. And if you have solar, you got rid of the thermal losses. Okay. If you have solar and wind, you save that 2/3 of the energy that is now going to waste heat in that cooling tower that I showed you that. Okay. How about homes? So we spend a lot of money going to war for oil, we're fracking, we're polluting the earth, we're getting earthquakes in Oklahoma, and then most of the energy goes out the windows. Passive houses can eliminate 80% of the typical energy use of houses. Even modestly good building standards, not to speak of, efficient heat pumps and all that. Okay, so we can get rid of most of this. So we talk about a smart grid. You've heard about a smart grid. So how are we going to get to the future? So the future is going to be electrified, and I'll talk a little bit about, diversification within electrification. But we need something called a smart grid, which means today we don't have a smart grid. What do I mean by that? Today's control system for electric generation is the on-off switch. All the on-off switches in the US economy, which are controlled by the consumers, the intelligence or information content of all those switches, each switch is a bit of information, can be put on a $15 flash drive. That's not a very good way to run a $450 billion piece of the economy, without which nothing else in the economy can run. So what a smart grid means: two-way communication. It means real-time information about the system. It means on the consuming side, your dishwasher and washing machine and air conditioner know when there's plenty of renewable energy, when the batteries are fully charged, and when they're not. And of course, consumers can be producers, consumers can provide services to the grid. And one thing that is ignored in models, so far as I know, is resilience, not reliability, not how often you have blackouts, but resilience. How much of your essential load can you supply when the grid goes down? And we've seen that not only with Hurricane Ian. New Orleans, the hurricane, I forget the name of the hurricane now, that struck New Orleans last year or the year before, and all the transmission lines to the city went out, and there was only one point of light, a building with solar and batteries. So in the future, resilience to keep essential loads on, it's not like 50 years ago. If the electricity goes out, your gas stations don't work, your elevators don't work, your food goes bad. So essential, there's no heat in the shelters if it happens in the winter. So essential services have to be maintained. Will you give me a kind of a 10-minute, 5-minute notice so I know I have 5 minutes to go through? So we need a smart grid. We know how to make a smart grid. Thank you. We know how to make a smart grid. We know how to make smart appliances. We know how to make appliances. It's sort of like your smart thermostat. We have demand response with air conditioners where the utility can cut off your air conditioner for an hour and you get paid for it. In the future, it can be, changing the temperature by a degree or two. And I'll talk about that a little bit, how that will work. So this is a grid of the future. The only thing I don't like about this is the distributed wind is on the roof. It really shouldn't be on the roof. It should be on the ground. Solar can be on the roof. So there's an electric car being charged. There's different control systems. There's data management. There is a grid, and you're connected to the grid. It works efficiently that way. It's not guaranteed that this system, in some places, it's electricity, like California, electricity is getting so expensive that people may just leave the grid. And that would be a very, very difficult situation for those who remain. And I'll talk about that too. So here's the basic idea to remember and why much of the thinking is going wrong. Why people say, we need nuclear good people, thoughtful people, people who don't have a vested interest. They're not from the industry. So it's not just the vested interest, which is a problem and probably the biggest one. The thinking that's wrong is we're trying to fit a radically different primary supply into an old model of thinking about the grid. The part of thinking about the grid that has to stay the same is that electron supply and demand must be balanced at all times. Otherwise, if there's too much supply and you don't curtail it, the grid will break down. If the supply is too short and you don't curtail the demand, the grid will break down. So if there's too much supply, you either have to curtail it or you have to absorb it in some place. If it's short, you have to supply it, or you will have a blackout, at least in part of your grid. So when now we have an energy system which is switchable. So reliability is maintained quite expensively. For instance, we have something called spinning reserves. We have gas turbines which are spinning, but which are not supplying electricity. But when a large load comes on, some cement plant turns on its motors, suddenly loading the grid, the voltage will dip for a short time, the frequency will dip for a short time, it will be sensed at the generating end, the fuel will start to flow in the turbines already spinning, so you don't have to wait, and the electrons will be balanced again. It's a pretty inefficient way to do things because you have to pay for that spinning reserve. The electricity system, on average, I think, leaving out wind and solar, this is before wind and solar, average capacity factor is 55 or 60%, somewhere in there. Pretty low for capital intensive industry, but necessary in the present system because electrons must go around, and that cannot be changed. Now that can't be changed if you have solar and wind. And people say the wind doesn't blow all the time, the sun doesn't shine all the time. I know the sun doesn't shine at night. It's the definition of night. I know the wind doesn't blow all the time. And I still insist this is the better way to do things. The concept is we need to marry the electron imperative with the rhythms of nature. And I'm going to explain how you do that. But that's the paradigm. We have to work. Did I spell rhythm right? Yeah, I think I did. That's the paradigm we have to keep in mind, not fight nature. And it could be a metaphor for the larger transformation we need also. So solar and wind would be the mainstays. We can keep some existing hydro useful if we can. Not necessary, but useful. We need to increase efficiency. I've given you lots of examples of where it could happen. Storage, we need some battery storage. I'll show you how much. Demand response, I've given you examples, So let me give you an example now. So today, you put your clothes in the washing machine and you press start, and the washing machine comes on. Tomorrow, the same thing will happen if you don't sign up for demand response. If you sign up for demand response, you'll get a check, maybe 30, 40, 50 bucks a year. And most of the time you press start, your washer will come on. But a few percent of the time, a few times a year, 3, 4, 5 times a year, your clothes washer will come on after a few hours because the grid is, you're contributing to lowering the demand at that time. And you've signed up saying, I want my clothes washed within a day, but not instantly. And you get paid for that. And every time the grid makes use of your demand response capacity, now you're supplying a service to the grid, you get paid more. It's sort of like air conditioner demand response works today. So we have electrified transportation, we have electrified heating. It should be efficiently electrified, geothermal heat pumps, cold climate heat pumps. In most areas, cold climate heat pumps are fine. I'll talk about vehicle to grid and seasonal thermal storage. So here's an example of working with the rhythms of nature. So when you have mainly solar and wind, and your heavier loads are in the summer and winter, air conditioning and heating, what happens is you have a lot of surplus in the fall and the spring. So you can throw away the surplus, curtail it, and if everybody's doing the same thing, you can't export it to your neighbor. I have solar and when I export my electrons, they pop into my neighbor's house because he doesn't have solar. Now, but if everybody is doing this, you either curtail or do something with it. One of the things you can do with it is to store the heat in insulated cells in the ground, convert it into cold like an ice making machine, and store the cold in the ground, or simply cool the earth in an insulated cell. There's a community in Alberta called the Drake Solar Community, and I can give you the link during the discussion. Now, it gets 40 below there in Alberta, so we're talking about as cold as it gets anywhere in the United States, except maybe Alaska, some parts of Alaska. They have been meeting 90% of their heating needs in the winter for the last 10 years, and some years essentially 100% from renewable energy that's stored in insulated cells, blocks in the ground. It's a small community, 50 houses, but they have done a wonderful thing by demonstrating this. And vehicle to grid is very important. We all know about charging electric vehicles, but I have never wanted a pickup truck until now. I don't think I'm going to buy this. It's too big, and I only drive a few miles a year. But this vehicle is capable of vehicle to grid, vehicle to home. In the current hurricane, when everything broke down in Florida for a couple of million people, in one of the worst hit areas, somebody had one of these Ford F-150 Lightning, and people were able to go and charge their phone. So this can also vehicle to home, vehicle to grid, vehicle to microgrid. It's all being condensed into one acronym, V2X, vehicle to everything. Many utilities are doing pilot programs, so you get paid. Now, you have to have that equipment in your car or in your house or in an airport parking lot. There are 10,000 long-term parking spots in the Baltimore-Washington airport. You don't need nuclear power. You don't need gas turbines. You need to think differently. So the combined power in the batteries will be larger than the battery storage we imagine today will be needed. So we need to integrate wind and solar with new thinking that works with the rhythms of nature. Rhythms of nature and V2G will mean you charge when there's plenty available. You're plugged into the grid. You can do this with school buses. There are experiments going on right here in Virginia, in many places now. School buses, transit buses, they don't run at night. And in the future, it's not going to be peak loads on hot days in the summer. In most parts of the country, even here in Maryland, not to speak of Minnesota or Wisconsin or North Dakota, the peak of electricity use is going to be at night when there's low wind for a few days. And so the whole idea of the peak won't be when there's the maximum load. The whole idea will be when there's the most load relative to what's available on the grid. It's not an absolute peak. It's a relative peak. And I've been talking about relational peaks now for over a decade. And finally, I think the whole concept is registering, not because I've said it so many times, but as we get more solar and wind, people realize that it's absolutely necessary to think differently. But this is an example of, if you think differently systematically and have working with the rhythms of nature as a mantra, it will appear in the economic system. So this is integrating the economic system with the rhythms of nature. You get paid to sign up to demand response. You get paid for vehicle to grid. You might get paid for the battery capacity if it deteriorates. It looks like these batteries will last for a long time. So, okay. So I did when I say I did my homework, I did work for 4 years to study whether Maryland could transition to a renewable energy system that was efficient with the electricity system powered essentially by solar and wind and 2% hydro that we already have. So these were the results, hour by hour modeling not only of supply and solar and wind, but hour by hour modeling of heating, of air conditioning, of lighting, of clothes washers, of dishwashers, of hot water heaters. So we did it all. There are millions of numbers in my spreadsheet. So we started that in 2012. So 2011 was the base year, finished in 2016. So this was the energy use in trillion BTU in 2011. This is business as usual, slight growth. Efficiency is growing in the normal course of the economy without special measures. So here's efficiency with special measures, getting rid of all that waste in the car tailpipes, getting rid of all that rejected heat at the power plants. And you can see you're running twice the size of the economy. I'm not making a judgment about economic growth. I'm just saying, if you think conventionally about the economy, you can run twice the economy with about 40% of the fuel and essentially all solar and wind, at least so far as the electricity is concerned. Cement plants, it'll take some work. So here are the costs. You save money. Today, things are cheaper and looking cheaper. Mostly low solar costs were already taken into account, but the offshore wind costs that I used for this report were much higher than today's offshore wind. But all to the good, right? So here's an ice making machine that's under some parking lots in California, making ice when the electricity is cheap and then providing it. It is a smart thermostat. All right. So how does it work? What are the numbers? So I tried to manually optimize some of these things, equal solar and wind, efficiency, electric vehicles, all that. So 100% of the load is met 68% of the hours in the year. So that means, for 4 months, you're not 4 hours equal to 4 months, you're not meeting your full load. Not so good, but 68% is already a lot. If you add just 5.5 hours of battery storage, your average load. So, the nuclear people say, to achieve solar plus wind plus storage, you need 3 months of storage. If you're trying to do 100% with solar, wind, and storage, it will take that much. But we're trying to remember to work with the rhythms of nature. So we have some battery storage on a diurnal basis, and this will discharge. It also means on that winter night, on some winter nights, that's that 4% you don't have. 4% of the year is 2 weeks. So, so that's a lot of hours. So you add demand response. Now in this, I did not model vehicle to grid. It was too long ago, 6 years ago. And I didn't know how to cost out what the utility would pay you, and how all the equipment would cost. It wasn't all together yet. It'd been demonstrated technically at the University of Delaware, which has been sort of the place where this technology was conceptualized and developed. And then part of what you do with the surpluses in the spring and fall is you make hydrogen on site, say at existing gas turbine power plants. And thank you, Toyota and all the other companies that have developed fuel cells for cars. They only use, cars are only used 2 or 3% of the time. So they're light duty fuel cells. They're very cheap, $100 a kilowatt, cheaper than gas turbines, I think. And so you can just use the existing infrastructure, make hydrogen on site with electrolysis. You can recover the water and recycle it because you're making the hydrogen right there. And then you get to 100%. You can have plenty of spare capacity because fuel cells are just $100 or less. All right, so we get a lot of benefits. Low water use, we've eliminated most of the water use. A nuclear power plant will take, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10, 15 million gallons of water a day, depending on the temperature of the water and the type of cooling and all that. No waste from fuel production. All capital-intensive projects, solar, wind, nuclear, coal, whatever, are going to have mining upfront. And we need to recycle all the materials. We might want to mine the landfills for what we've dumped in them. So it's not sustainable in that sense, but we absolutely need to build in recycling of everything for wind, solar, batteries, all that now, not in the future. But no mining for fuel. No nuclear mining, no uranium waste, no mill tailings, no mining wastes, all that. No coal ash ponds, no fracking pollution. Okay, no, indoor air pollution will go down and outdoor air pollution will be essentially eliminated from generation and transportation. Indoor air pollution will go down. There's a lot of indoor air pollution from, say, cooking with natural gas. We're going to come out with a report on that and significant health and economic benefits. Lots of benefits. I want to talk about affordability. I have been shocked by how many people become homeless through simple rent energy. About almost 5% of the people who get assistance every year lose their homes. About 3/4 of them wind up with friends and family, and 1/4 of them actually become homeless. That's hundreds of thousands of people a year. Now, I think with all the rent increases and cost increases, that is probably getting worse. Food and medicine conflicts with utility bills, and utility bills turn out to be essential because if your utility gets turned off, then your food goes to waste. If there are too many problems, So this problem can be solved. I'm not going to go into it in detail, but we did a study with physician scientists and engineers for healthy energy on, can you increase the assistance so that affordability limits are met? 6% of your income for utility bills is defined as an affordable amount, maximum affordable amount. And so we kind of did a thought experiment, a detailed technical thought experiment. We said, suppose everybody is enrolled in such a percentage of income payment plan for utility assistance, and you also weatherized and did community solar, discounted community solar, electrified the heating. So compared to just giving people assistance, which is very important, and we should do it, you would actually save money by fully and urgently integrating all low-income households into the energy transition. So this is a pretty detailed study. It took a lot of numbers to get to this point. I believe it's pretty unique, but we'll actually save money. But we're not thinking this way. So what's stopping us? So there's lots of things that are slowing things down. The Inflation Reduction Act will help a lot, despite its flaws and problems and, subsidies for nuclear and oil and gas drilling and all that, but it will help a lot. And I can answer some questions about that if you have, but I won't go into it now. Of course, the fossil fuel and nuclear industry know that nuclear is twice as costly as solar with storage. That's the situation today. If you build it and complete it and turn it on, that is. There's carbon capture and sequestration. Huge costs, very difficult. I've written about this. Now, hydrogen can be good or bad. I've said, you can make hydrogen electrolytically, where you can make hydrogen, from gas and then combine it with CCS, put it in gas pipelines, bring it to your home. No. Burning hydrogen will increase nitrogen oxide pollution. You have to create a whole new infrastructure. But this is a way that gas companies are trying to keep their pipeline infrastructure going and keeping everybody hooked on. In Maryland, we've got giant investments that have been allowed by the Public Utilities Commission that are going to keep people paying for the gas pipeline infrastructure until the end of this century, even though we have a law now that says we have to be carbon neutral by 2045. That was just passed this year, but still, there's no sign that the gas companies are saying, oh, yeah, 2045, we better kind of phase out our infrastructure. There's a terrible shortage of bleeding hearts, but I don't know how to increase the supply of that. But we need to fight for equity nonetheless. Then there's the land use and the viewshed. I want to talk about that as I close. So here is the viewshed. Now, wind, offshore wind to some extent will address part of that problem. But wind turbines are actually saving family farms and ranches all the way from Texas to Minnesota. I actually talked with a corn and soy farmer in southwestern Minnesota. He's a prominent man. He was an agriculture secretary and a senator in the state some years back. And so people say, oh, lots of land use for solar and wind. First of all, let me tell you that currently we are using 30 million acres to grow corn for 10% of automotive fuel in the form of ethanol. 30 million acres. That's 2 to 3 times, I think 3 times as much land as you need to generate electricity for everything. Now, you're not going to put, solar panels on 30 million acres in Iowa and Minnesota and so on, or Illinois. But that gives you an idea that people who say land use, including, our academic colleagues at Princeton University and, with their models and so on. And I'm sad to be critical, but it is essential. And then there's this problem of the viewshed. And I say, instead of leaving 30 bombs of plutonium every year that every 1,000 megawatt reactor makes for hundreds of generations in the future, at least, look at your energy source. If you don't like it, learn to switch off the lights, put rooftop solar. You have lots of options. Now, I've stood under one of these kind of wind turbines to see about the noise. I could have a perfectly good conversation standing right under the turbine. But, these things can be debated, but I don't think that this should be compared in any way to fossil fuels and nuclear energy. And it is saving counties. So this person who used to be agriculture secretary in Minnesota, he was actually talking to me partly from his wind turbine. He has a wind turbine on his farm. He said, our county and the schools in the county have been saved because there's a law in Minnesota to put a modest tax on large wind farms, and that entire tax is sent to the counties. And that's how they keep their schools open and Main Street going. We should do this. Agrivoltaics.
Oh, sorry, just so it is 6:50. Yes.
Am I out of time?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, you can finish up your slide, but it is 6:50.
This is literally the last slide.
Perfect.
So recently I heard a podcast of a professor at Princeton with Times, and lots of land, solar, you have to cover Ohio, Illinois, and so on, with solar panels if you want. So, mainly solar energy. So maybe we should consider nuclear and CCS, partly because of land use. Now, let me tell you the numbers I have done. I have done detailed numbers for the state I live in, Maryland. I did a whole study on agrivoltaics from the point of view of the farmer. Would it benefit the farmer and save the family farm. It could. In Maryland, we have about 2 million acres of farmland. If half of the energy were wind and half were solar, that would mean, and half of the solar needs to be distributed for resilience. You need to build those microgrids, you need the rooftop, you need local solar for the essential loads when the grid goes down. So in a reasonable system, you might have large scale, utility scale, big community solar, about 1/4 of your electricity supply. So that'll be like this. There's a photograph from North Carolina, the North Carolina State University. It would take about 80,000 acres, so about 4% of the land, agricultural land, in a fully renewable system that's reasonably well designed to do solar in Maryland. And Maryland is not a great state for solar. It's not the worst. Obviously, it's not Alaska, but it's not New Mexico either. And in New Mexico, less. Now, that's just the acreage, but that includes the part on which the sheep are grazing. The steel posts and the concrete footings, that's just 2,000 acres. 2,000 acres for 25% of the electricity supply in a renewable energy system is much less than the land currently occupied by the coal, gas, and nuclear plants in the state, not counting the mining. So I think we should require agrivoltaics. We should integrate food production with the energy system. We have to think holistically. We have to think the rhythms of nature. And I can confidently tell you that we can do renewables, solar, and wind as mainstays, and we do not need new nuclear. Now, phasing out existing nuclear and how that is to be done is a different talk, but that's the direction in which we should go. Nuclear should be made an obsolete industry, and we should dispense with new nuclear now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Makhijani. I feel so hopeful now. I really am a lot happier after seeing that presentation. So thank you. It's really good to know that we do have an energy future that is possible, that doesn't rely on destroying the environment and lots of people's communities. So thank you so much. And now I'm going to transition to Michael Wenzel for a hybrid Q&A. So we'll see how this is going to work. Thank you.
Okay.
We'd prefer that you write it down on the card.
I saw a question, why not rooftop solar? Should I go ahead and answer that?
Yes, go ahead and do that while we're getting.
When I say distributed solar, definitely it includes rooftop solar. I have rooftop solar on my roof. So yes, rooftop solar on commercial residential buildings. In fact, if you go to our website, I'll put it in the chat, you'll see a report, Gold on the Roof, in which I did a report, is it economical to mandate solar on new construction? And the answer was yes. Building standards are a big part of the answer. Gold on the roof. So yeah, rooftop solar is a part of it, but it's not all of it. Rooftop solar is more expensive. You can extract more value from it. It needs to be integrated. You connect the rooftop solar, local storage, V2G. It should be a whole system. We should think holistically, not just, I'm going to do my rooftop solar and use the grid as a battery for me. And yeah, there's some transfer costs involved in that. We need to think through integration better.
Okay, thank you. So the first question I have is, would a smart grid technology require that existing homes be rewired?
Well, if you have, in some cases, that's why this kind of thing, all electric, should be mandated for new homes, because you need heavier service. And, if you're going to electrify your gas heating, you're going to consume more current, unless you make everything more efficient. But still, for peak peak load in your house, you may need to heavy up the service to your house. In most cases, you may not need rewiring for the house, except maybe to the furnace area. I think, yeah, you may need rewiring to the furnace and water heater area. I do think that we need to make our investments in the distribution side of the system. So the local part of the electricity system. There's a lot of debate about, transmission. People don't want transmission lines in their backyards. I think if we think rhythms of nature, distribution, resilience, and the investments need to be in the distribution part of the system, distributed storage, distributed heat, V2G. If you wire up Baltimore, Washington Airport, long-term parking lots, you are going to have to invest in that infrastructure. So we need some, and many houses will need rewiring, many may not. There's no general answer to that.
Thank you. So the next question, will the current mashup that is our grid presently support the grid of the future, or will a total rebuild be required?
It will be different. I haven't done the modeling of this, so you should take this under advisement, trust but verify mode. My sort of qualitative answer is that if we attend to resilience properly, we will generate a lot of our energy from distributed sources. And now distributed wind, you shouldn't mind if there's a wind turbine in your strip mall. At least I think it's not good. It might improve the view, so we have microgrids and distributed resources. I think a lot of the generation, maybe a fourth, or now with distributed wind, maybe even more, a third of your generation can come locally. If it is well done, we may not need new transmission corridors. If we have, for instance, we build wind in the Midwest and try to bring it to the Atlantic coast or, places where there's less wind. Existing transmission corridors should be rewired. We have 100-year-old design of transmission wires. The wires you see on the transmission poles, those wires are aluminum. I'm going to get technical on you here. They are called aluminum. They're aluminum wires with steel reinforcement in the middle so that when they sag, they don't break. So aluminum by itself would break. So you need that reinforcement. Steel, of course, is a magnetizable, has lots of eddy currents in it with alternating current. In the summer, when it's very hot, the wires get very hot and the losses in the wires are higher. And what determines how much current can be carried with an existing arrangement of poles is the losses in the wires and how much they sag. Because if they sag too much, they break. And then you have a problem. Now we have conductors that are not reinforced with steel, and they can carry 20, 30, 40, 50% more power. So the existing transmission corridors should be wired up with new wires to the extent we need them. This is another example of old thinking. People say, oh, you need a lot of wind turbines in the Midwest. Fair enough, we might. But we should strategically think of locating them and pay people who are near existing corridors more and rewire the existing corridors. If we do it right, we shouldn't need a lot of new transmission corridors, my opinion. But that's not a guaranteed answer. That's an opinion without having done the numbers. It's qualitative. But we need to think in this new mode, and not a lot of modeling is being done thinking in this new mode. Do it in New Mexico.
Thank you. You spoke about using solar and wind and combining these with existing hydro and with new storage technology to decarbonize the grid. What about geothermal?
Yeah, geothermal, there are three different kinds of geothermal. There's geothermal with hot water reservoirs, with the Yellowstone hot springs being the most best known example of that. That's very rare. That doesn't happen in a lot of places. Now, California has geothermal generation, quite a lot of it. Where we have it, we should use it. Geothermal uses a lot of water. And if you extract too much geothermal heat, it won't be renewable. So you can only extract it at a certain rate because it's replenished at a certain rate. And yeah, we should use geothermal, but that kind of geothermal is not widely available. So I don't normally mention it. I'm not against it. There's geothermal in which the earth is fractured, hot rock fracturing. This involves basically a fracking technology without the gas. It's been tried. There are some seismic risks associated with it. So while I recommended it when I wrote Carbon Free, Nuclear Free, I am much more cautious about it now. And I think we don't really need it because solar and wind are so cheap and they don't use water. Water is going to be, Mark Twain said, whiskey is for drinking and water is for fighting over. Well, we are there. And especially, where you're having a conference. And so liberating water resources is very, very important. You've got the Four Corners plant with the San Juan River there. When those plants shut down, a lot of water is going to be liberated. I hope the Navajo Nation can will be able to assert their rights should they have some. I haven't studied that question. Yeah, so I think we need microgrids for reliability and resilience, and they can have distributed solar and wind, and of course distributed batteries and distributed, and demand response, all integrated V2G, all that. So that sort of should be the mainstay of the thinking. And unfortunately, today we're focused on one dimension, decarbonization, and one-dimensional thinking is not good. We live in at least four that we know about, right? I think there are only.
Thank you. There's a recent Associated Press story about a wind solar battery hybrid plant in Lexington, Oregon. The plant just opened and at maximum output facility to produce half the power of Oregon's last coal plant. This sounds like the type of thing Colorado should be interested in, as opposed to there's been continuing lobbying by different people with our elected officials. So what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I agree. I saw that a few days ago and I liked it a lot. You can put wind, you can join wind with solar if the wind resource is available, and the wind turbines are getting better and better, so you can do it in more and more places. Now, I do think, yeah, it's a very good thing to do because you're making better use of your transmission resources and the investments in those wires. Because wind at night, you're using a transmission resource that you wouldn't be if you only had solar. So, but even if you're doing that, I think dual use is important if you're doing it on ranch land or farmland.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Arjun. I was just informed that was the last question I could take for now. What we want to do is there's remaining questions, and if you're okay, we can email those to you. And if you're open to that, you could respond, and we can get
back. Or some of them might be in the chat and or in the Q&A, and I can maybe answer them. Yeah, you can email them to me.
Good. So I'm going to give this back to Jamie then. Thank you so much.